let my people go down. Moses, way down in Egypt land, Pharaoh, let my people go. Oh, I guess you thought I was sleeping. No. I was listening to a voice that was telling me to let my people go. Go down, Moses, he said, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Well, I had lots of names. One of them was Moses, Harriet. But when I was a little girl, they didn't call me Harriet. They called me Araminta. Minty, for short. When I was a little girl, I was a slave. I guess you know what a slave is. A slave was something that you could buy. Like you could buy a cat, or you could buy a piece of cloth, or you could buy a cow. And you owned it. And you could make it do whatever you wanted it to do. They didn't have no rights. You took it where you wanted to take it and send it where you wanted to send it. Well, I was a slave. At least that's what they say. I remember when I was a little baby. You may think that I can't remember back that long, but I was still in the cradle. My father, that was Ben, old Ben they call him, he worked out there in the woods and he would cut down trees. Well, once he cut down a tree and he sawed it, and he put a plank at this end and a plank at that end and sit it on our cabin floor, and he said to my mom, Rit, he said, here's a cradle for the new baby. And that's where they put me. They put me right there in that cradle. My mom, Rit, just had another baby. So the people down there in the big house, I don't know if you can see it, way down there, you can see the columns on it. Just look, you can see that great big house. That's where they come from. Well, that's where she worked. She worked there all day except for a couple days after she had the baby. Then they let her stay there with the baby. Well, one day, the people from the big house, the girls from the big house, they all come down to see Ma Rit's new baby. Oh, they just fussed over me. They picked me up out of the cradle, and they looked at me, and they said, Rit, this is a pretty little baby. Just look at that face. And they took me and threw me up in it, and they caught me. They didn't let me fall. Yeah, and then they looked at me again, and they threw me up in the air, and they caught me. They took good care of me. And then they put me back in the cradle, and they went back to the big house. Well, I can remember my mom looking at me in the cradle and saying, I got to go now, Harriet. I've got to go to the big house. One of my brothers or sisters would take care of me. And when I got to be a little bigger, I had another brother. And then another little baby came. His name was Moses. And they put him in the cradle. And I guess I was about 3-4 years old. I'm not sure exactly how old, but I would take care of my two brothers. while my mom worked in the big house. So one day I was there taking care of him. My mom was away and he wasn't crying. So I said, well, I'm going to do something with him. So he had on this little gown, and I picked him up by the bottom of the gown, and I said, I'm going to make you laugh. And I took him, and I swung him around. Oh, he was just laughing. Well, then I said, well, you like it that way. I'll go and do it the other way. So I swung him around again. Oh, he was happy. But as the day went on, he started to cry and wouldn't stop. He was hungry. So I looked around. There wasn't nothing to eat. Harriet didn't come back yet. So I saw a little piece of fat over there on the stove hearth, and I picked it up and I put it in the fire and let it brown a little. And I put that in his mouth. Well, Moses, he just liked that. He sucked on that until he went to sleep with that fat thing hanging out his mouth. Well, my ma Harriet came home and she saw Moses in the cradle. She liked to die because she thought he was dead. I said, Ma, he ain't dead. He's just sucking on that piece of fat. So she said to me, well, Rich, you ain't but knee-high to a grasshopper, and you're getting into all sorts of things. You was a smart little girl. I know you like to be outside looking at all the different things out there, but the ladies in the big house, they say, you're ready to go to work. And I'm thinking, well, I like new things. Why not? I go to work. So they sent me up to the big house. And Miss Susan, she's up there in the big house with her new baby. And the baby, it was crying all the time. Something wrong with that baby. He was cute. I liked him fine, but he was crying all the time. And he weren't hungry. So they said to me, now, Rick, oh no, this was Minty. They say, Minty, you're to take care of this child. When he's crying, you rock him and make sure he goes to sleep. So I said, okay, that sounds okay to me. I can do that, but I couldn't sit on a chair. I wasn't big enough to sit up there on a chair, so I sat down there on the floor with the little baby, and I'd rock him. I'd rock him and put him in my lap and rock him this way until he fell asleep. And then I'd put him back in the cradle. Well, it took a long time for him to go to sleep, so I thought, well, now I guess my work is done. I can go out and play a little bit. But then Miss Susan come in the room and she said, well, Minty, now that you've got the baby asleep, I have a little work for you to do. And I said, well, I thought that was my work. She said, well, no, you got the baby asleep. I've got a little more for you to do. I want you to go into the parlor where the piano is, and I want you to dust everything in that room and sweep the floor. So she gave me a broom, and I started to sweep. I swept. I was used to sweeping. I would sweep the cabin floor. It wasn't like this. It didn't have rugs on it or nothing. It just a dirt floor, but I swept it and kept it clean, so I knew how to do that. Oh, I swept, get it all nice and clean, and then I took the rag and I wiped off the banana, and I went over there and wiped off all the things, and everything looked just fine to me, so I called Miss Susan to come back in and take a look. She came in and she said, Minty, where this dust come from? I said, well, I dusted it. Well, then you better do it again. Because if you don't do it right, I'm going to whip you. So I did it again. I swept and I dusted. And she came in and she looked and said, well, now, Minty, this is the last time I'm going to tell you. It ain't clean. So I swept and I dusted, and she came in and she whooped me. Up there in the wall, you see that? Called a cat o' nine tails. Well, she whipped me. And she said, now you do it again, or I'm going to whip you again. So I swept again, and she checked again, and she whipped me again. Well, I was lucky, I guess, because her sister was visiting that day. And her sister heard her whipping me, and she came down in a fury, and she said, to Miss Susan, if you whip that child again, I'm going to go home. So Miss Susan said, well, if you can tell her how to do it right, then I won't have to whip her. Well, Miss Eliza, she came in and she said to me, now, Minty, how did you do this job? And I said, well, I took the broom and I swept, and then I went into the parlor and I dusted. And she said, well, now, Minty, I'm going to show you how to do it. You sweep the floor, and while the dust is settling, go into the dining room and set the table. And when you come back, all the dust will be settled, and then you dust. And so that's what I did. Well, Miss Susan comes in again, and she says, well, Minty, I'm glad you finally got it right. And I heard Miss Liza say to her, well, all you had to do, Susan, is to tell her how to do it. She ain't but knee-high to a grasshopper. Well, then after I did all that dusting and worked around the house for a day, then they say, well, the baby's still likely to cry at night. So, Minty, I want you to go up into my room and you sit in there with the baby, and when he cries, you rock him to sleep, because I don't want to have to wake up. I'm tired. That was what Miss Susie said, she's tired. So I went into her room and I sat there with the baby, and I rocked him in his cradle till he went to sleep. And then I fell asleep. Well, the baby woke up, and Miss Susan woke up, and I guess you know the rest. She had a cat o' nine tail up on her wall, and she whipped me good. Well, she really whipped me that time. I still have the scars to prove it. Well, that time they sent me home. They sent me home to Ma Rit, and she took care of that. Ma Rit was good. She would go out into the woods and she'd find all these different kinds of plants, and she'd mix them together and she'd stew them, and she'd roil it, and she'd do all sorts of things and make a salve, and she put it on my neck and on my back. And she got me so that I could go to work again. Well, in those days, if they had slaves that had too many of them, they would hire them out. They would say, well, you can't do nothing around here. We got enough people doing around here. I'll send you down, maybe to the lady that weaves. She needs somebody to learn how to weave. So they sent me down there. Well, I went down there and I saw that big old loom. You know what a loom is? Well, that's a place where they have all these strings coming down, and you have to go in and out and in and out and zip it through and do all that. Oh, I didn't like to do that. So they said to me, well, Minty, since you don't like to work in the house, we'll let you work outside. You can go help set the traps and catch the muskrat. Well, do you know what a muskrat is? He's an ugly looking animal. Look like a rat, all kind of funny fur on him. But they're good eating. They're real good eating. So I had to go out there. Well, I was just as happy to be out there setting the traps. And sometime I let one of them go. I opened the trap and I said, go, hurry up, get out of here. Well, I was out there working on those traps, and I got the measles, and I had a fever. And they say, go out there and tend to the traps. There's still muskrat to be caught, whether you're sick or not. So I worked out there in that water in those traps, and I got so sick, they had to send me home again to Ma Rit, and she got me well. When I got better, I went back to that house. And when I got there, oh, they were fighting. It was always the fighting. They always seemed like they had something mean to say to each other. I went in there, and there was the table all set, and they were getting ready to eat. So I sidled over to the table because right there I saw a big bowl of sugar. Well, I ain't never had no sugar. I knew it tasted good, but I ain't never had none. So I thought, well, while they're arguing, I'm going to take a little of that sugar. I went over, and I didn't even have my fingers on that sugar when Miss Somebody said, "Minty!" Well, I didn't stay around. I just ran. I ran way down the road. I ran past the houses. I didn't go inside or hide there because I know they knew me and they knew this lady, and if they caught me, I'd be in trouble. So I kept a running. Well, I ran so far, I was getting tired, and I came to a pigsty. Well, there was this great big mama pig with all her little pigs. And I said, well, they got food to eat, maybe they share it. So I climbed over the fence and got down there with the pigs. The mama pig, she said, well, don't take any food from my little piglets. She would bite me when I tried to get some food, but every once in a while I'd be able to get a little piece of tater or a piece of carrot. Well, I stayed in there for 4 days. 4 days. I was getting hungry because Mama Pig, she didn't want me to eat. No, she said, it's for my little piglets. So after a while, I decided to climb over the fence and go back to the big house. Well, I guess you say the lady with me. No, not this time. Her husband with me. He whipped me good and sent me back to my mom, really. Well, that's the way I grew up. After a while, I felt that instead of working in the big house, I'd like to work outside. I didn't want to work in the big house anymore. So they let me go out in the fields. I was growing up and I was looking around at everything. I was curious. My Pa Ben, he is a person who knows all about the woods, and he would tell me things. He would tell me things about, well, really, you want to see which way is north. Well, look at the way the moss is growing on this tree. If it's on this side, you know that that side is north. And he would show me how to recognize different kinds of plants. And he would show me how to make things that would be useful for me. Showed me how to strike a stone against another stone and make fire. I learned a lot of things from my Pa then. Well, one day when I was working out in the fields, we were picking, I don't know what, cotton, and working and putting it in those sacks all day long. And then I looked out, and from the side of my eye, I could see one of the boys moving across the field. And I was always curious. I was saying in my head, what's he doing? Well, then I see the overseer. I don't know whether you know what an overseer is. Well, this one was me. He would make sure that you worked hard as he thought you ought to work. And if you didn't work hard, he'd take a strap out and make sure you got moving a little faster. And I see him going after the boy as he's going across the field. And so I thought, well, I'm going to follow him. And I did. The boy went to a little store, and he was getting ready to go out the back. I ran in, trying to make sure that nothing happened to him. And the man, he picked up a weight. I don't know how heavy it was, but I think it was heavier than he thought it was. And he threw it. He meant to hit the boy, but he hit me. Well, in those days, I guess, you know, I didn't have on this fancy hat. This is my speaking hat. I had on a bandana. Ain't this a pretty piece of material? Well, this was part of a curtain that my mistress made, and she gave it to me, she said. Minty, while you're out there in the fields, your head be better if it was covered up. Keep out all that sun. So I had on my hat. And when that weight struck me, it pushed it into my scalp. And they had to pick pieces of my bandana out. Well, I was bleeding. And I felt as though I couldn't stand up on my feet. So they carried me in and laid me on the bench. And they let me lay there for maybe 2 or 3 hours. And then somebody said, well, now I guess you're all right now. Go out there in the field and do what you have to do. So I could scarcely walk, and the blood was coming down into my eyes, but I went out there and I worked in the field until I fainted. And they finally took me again to my ma, Harriet, and she worked on getting me well. But it wasn't just a day this time, it was months. Maybe it was years. I think it was forever. I still, every once in a while, they say I just fall asleep. Now, they may think I'm asleep, but I'm seeing all sorts of things. I'm flying. You see this quilt? You see all these different markings on it? Well, one time when they say I was asleep, I was up there in the air, and I was looking down on all the fields. I could see where they had planted cotton, and I could see where they had planted corn. I could see where the rivers went. And I could hear the Lord talking to me. He said, you've got a right to 2 things. You got a right to be free, and you got a right to die. And I say, well, if I can't have one, I'm sure I'm going to have the other. Well, they got me well enough to put me back out there in the fields. And I was working, and I heard this voice coming from far away, it seemed. It was saying, Minty. And I looked up, and there was my sisters, 2 of them. They were yoked together, and they were pulling them down the road, and my sister was calling, Minty, Minty. They were taking her off to sell her down the river, they called it, down to Georgia or someplace where it's worse even than it was here. I never saw them again. Now they say that, oh, it ain't so bad being a slave. Well, you get your meals, you get your clothes, you got a place to work, you got something to do, you've got an old shack to lay down on. Ain't got no beds, but you got someplace to keep the rain off your head. They say some masters are really nice, but that may be true, but I just never met none of them. When my sister got pulled away, I never saw him again. My ma and my pa, they didn't live together. My pa was owned by one man, my ma was owned by somebody else. He'd come to visit, he'd take me to work with him. But it wasn't like it was a family all the time. You didn't know when you were going to be sold away. Well, this is the way it went, many years. Once my sisters were sold away, I felt, well, I gotta stay with my parents. I want to make sure that they know that they've got a family with them. I grew up. I got married. I married John Tubman. Well, now John wasn't no slave. He was a free man. I'm not sure how he ever got to be free, but he was a free man. And I think that's why I was so attracted to him. Why, he would whistle and he would tell stories. And he just seemed to have a different mood to him than most of the people on that plantation. So I married John Tubman. But one day, I heard that they was going to sell me and my brothers down the river. We had tried to run away once and didn't quite work and had to come back, but we said, well, we stay with our mom. But now they say they're going to sell us down the river. And I say, I ain't going to be sold. So I took my quilt. Now this quilt I made when John Tubman and I got married. And I knew I wasn't going to just leave it anywhere. So I took it and I say, I'm going to give it to that Quaker lady that lives on the other side of the hill. At that time, there were lots of people who didn't like the idea of slavery, not just the blacks. There were people they called Quakers and abolitionists. And my pa Ben. Lots of people who got information from here and there and pass it on in different ways. So I decided I'm going to take this quilt to that Quaker lady, and she's going to tell me what to do next. But before I go, I want to tell my sister's girl, the one that was sold down south, she left 2 babies behind her. And my ma Harriet raised them. I was going to go tell Mary, I'm going to leave you. Well, I went into where she was working in the kitchen and we frolicked around a little bit and sort of just got ready to say goodbye. So she came outside, and here comes Dr. Thompson up on his great big old horse. He see us talking together, he put a whipping on us. So I say, well, I know what I can do. I can sing. I can tell her that I'm going to leave. Well, I'm going to leave you, going to the promised land. And here comes Mr. Thompson up on his big old horse, and he's looking down on me and saying, what, you crazy Minty, Harriet, whatever your name is, you act like you're crazy. And I just looked up at him and I said, well, I'm going to leave you, going to the promised land. And I backed out the gate. And then I opened the gate up and came back and said to him again, well, I'm going to leave you, going to the promised land. And I kept on the go. I took this quilt to the Quaker lady. I gave her the quilt and she gave me 2 pieces of paper. And I looked at them, didn't look like much more than chicken scratching to me because I couldn't read. But I gave her the quilt, She gave me the paper. Well, you know, then they didn't let slaves read. They figure, oh, if you learn how to read, you might find out a little more than we want you to know. I remember one time I was going to take some of the kids to school. There was a little one-room schoolhouse, and I would take some of the children from the big house to the school. I walked them there, and they went inside, and I sat outside. And I heard the teacher say, Jeremiah, spell book. Well, Jeremiah didn't know how to spell book, so there was nothing but silence. And then she asked Isaiah to spell book, and Isaiah didn't know how to spell book. I was sitting out there on the bench. I stand up, I say, book, B-O-O-K, and I ran. I stay around there, they beat me, think I know how to read. Well, I didn't know how to read, but I had a good memory, and I would listen to what they had to say. Well, I took these pieces of paper, and they told me to go to the lady who lives on the other side of the river and give her these papers. So I gave her the paper, and she gave me a broom. I looked at the broom, I said, I come all this way to get a broom? And then I thought, well, she wants me to sweep so that if I'm out there sweeping, they'll think that I work for her. So I said, well, that makes sense. So I started to sweep. I don't think that that yard ever got such a sweep. And I swept until her husband came home. And he came with this great big wagon full of all kinds of fruit and vegetables. But right down at the bottom, there was a hole, and that's where I went. Now, I was still small. I never did get big, just about 5 feet. But I got into that little hole, and that carriage took me away to the next place. And I made my way north. I hid in holes. I went out at night. I didn't have this on. I'd cover up. And I would look to where north was. One of the things my Pa Ben taught me was look for the picture in the sky. See where those stars are. That's the picture. Then follow it up to the end where the handle is. And follow that star up. That's the North Star. Anytime you lost, you know where north is. You can find your way. And that's what I did. Finally got to Pennsylvania. Now, I know you live here in Pennsylvania, but this was right outside of Philadelphia. And it seemed like I could see the line between where I was in the South and when I was in a free land. And I looked at my hands and I say, are these the same hands that was a slave? I looked up at the sun and it looked like there was glory over everything. I felt like I didn't know what it was like to be free, because here I was, but my mom and my pa were still down in Maryland. And I thought then that what I was going to do was to go back and get them. All of them. Wasn't none of my family want to stay in slavery. Well, I stayed there for a couple of years. I worked in Philadelphia, I worked in Cape May, I did lots of cleaning, and I got together a few dollars, and I went back. Before I went, I hired myself a little room, and I bought me a suit of clothes, not for myself, but for John Tubman. I went back there, and when I got back there, I found that John had gotten himself married again. So I said, well, if he can do without me, I guess I can do without him. And from then on, I'd be directed to get my family out of the South. So that's what happened way back then. Took my family up to Canada. For a while, we thought we could just stay in Pennsylvania, but they had some kind of law say if you get caught and you don't have the papers on you, you could be taken right back from where you came. So I decided to take all my family to Canada. Well, they settled there. I finally got my mom and my pa. They settled there and I took care of them. But the war happened. They wanted me. They say, Harriet, she knows all about the woods. She knows where things stay, and she knows how to get to places most people don't know how to get to. So they say, Harriet, come and help with the war. Well, sometimes they call me Harriet, sometimes they call me Moses. Old John Brown, he called me General. He saw me in the room one time, and he said, he come over and he said, I say hello to General Tubman once. I say hello to General Tubman twice. I say hello to General Tubman 3 times. And he was the one person that I knew who just treated me like I was myself. He didn't care what color you were. Well, finally, I went further south and became a nurse while I was a spy. Oh, I knew where things were. They told me, find out where the contraband is, find out where the ammunition is. I could go through those swamps. I knew just how they worked. Well, one time I was working with General Montgomery, and we went down and tried to get contraband. I don't know whether you know what contraband is. It's us. It's the slaves that was set free. They had to go down there and free the slaves. I went down there with them, and they bring all these people out. They run in all which way when they see the boats coming. They say, oh, we don't know what to do. How are we going to get out of here? And there were the gunboats, and everybody was clinging to them. A lady came out, she had just finished cooking rice, and she had a pot of rice on her head. She had a baby clinging to this shoulder, a baby clinging to that shoulder. She had a pig under her arm. She had something here. And I said, well, this is about the funniest thing I ever saw. I was just laughing. But they were all trying to get onto that gunboat. So the General Montgomery said to me, well, now, Moses, you talk to your people. And I said, well, I don't know their language. They don't speak what I speak. How am I going to talk to them? And then I remembered. Come from the east, come from the west. Oh, this country is the best. Come along, come along. Don't be alarmed, for Uncle Sam, he has enough to give you all the farm. Come along. And they shout, glory, glory. They settle down. They let other people get on the boat so they can take them to the boat that would get them away. Well, when I finished that, then the war came. And that was a hard thing. I went down there to nurse them. I nursed anybody who was bleeding, anybody who needed the help. Didn't matter to me whether they were black or white. If they was bleeding, I'd help them. I went somewhere where they had a bad, bad case of dysentery. Oh, even the doctor, the surgeon, he was laid up sick. So I say, well, I know how to cure that. Go into the swamp where it starts and put together a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I made him some tea. He drank it. The next day he was fine. And so he said, make a big pot of it and give it to the soldiers. And they got better. But the war wasn't no kind of thing you'd want to see. I'd start out in the morning with a basin, and I put a chunk of ice in it. And I take my sponge, and I walk over to a soldier. Flies all over his wound. It looked like it was a bunch of bees a-swarming. I whisk them away, and I take my sponge and wipe off his wound. And he looking up at me saying, sing something, Moses. And then I'd go on to the next one. And in a couple of hours, the ice had melted, and that pot looked like it was all blood. When you hear the lightning, that's the guns. When you hear the thunder, that's the big guns. When you see the rain falling, that's the blood from the soldiers. And when you go out to reap your crop, they're the dead soldiers. War. Well, I got sick down there, got real tired, so they finally let me go back to Auburn, New York, where my family was. And I nursed them there. And after a while, they were talking about women, how women should be able to vote. They asked me, do you think women should vote? I said, well, you know, I think I worked hard enough to prove that they got the right to vote. I'd go to their places and talk to them the way I'm talking to you now, tell them about my adventures. Well, nobody lasts forever. I got tired, just like my mother and my father. Oh, they were old when they died. I took care of them until they did. Took care of a lot of people. I had people in a nursing home that we set up in Auburn. When I got old, they let me stay there too. Oh, I got so tired that sometimes I would just stay in that room all day, not move my legs. They said, well, old Harriet, she can't move no more. But one day I tried those legs. I got up, went downstairs, had myself a nice big breakfast, came back upstairs and sat down, saying, everybody come into the room with me. And I sang, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. If you get to heaven before I do, coming for to carry